Hello and welcome to Our American States, a podcast from the National Conference of State Legislatures. This podcast is all about legislatures, the people in them, the policies, process, and politics that shape them. I'm your host, Ed Smith.
There is not an industry or a company or an organization that I've met with in the last 6 months that haven't had a workforce shortage.
That was Tennessee Senator Becky Massey, one of my guests on the podcast. The economy in the U.S. went on a wild ride during the pandemic, and many of the challenges in the workforce became headline news, from dropping participation to the Great Resignation. My guests offer two key perspectives. Massey is a state legislator who has worked extensively on workforce issues and just recently took on the role of co-chair of NCSL's Labor and Economic Development Committee. She talks specifically about what states can do to aid workforce development. Eric Selznow is with the Center for Apprenticeship in Work-Based Learning at Jobs for the Future. He previously served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Department of Labor's Employment and Training Administration. He's also had other roles in state and federal government focused on workforce development. He discussed apprenticeships and other efforts that are needed in workforce development. Here's our discussion, starting with Senator Massey. Senator Massey, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me to join you today.
Senator, let me first congratulate you on your new role as co-chair of the Labor and Economic Development Committee at NCSL.
I'm looking forward to doing it. It's such an important committee, and it's really something that we all need to continually be looking for improvements.
Let me start with the big picture question. Why are labor and economic development issues generally so important to you and to Tennessee?
There is not an industry or a company or an organization that I've met with in the last 6 months that haven't had a workforce shortage. As a former intellectual disability provider, we had the workforce shortages before it really became a problem, but I think the pandemic just really increased that. But it really is just across the field. There's very few sectors that probably have more workers than they actually need.
Many of us who are not too keyed into workforce issues have become more aware of them in the last 2 years as the pandemic upended the economy. We've all seen the headlines about labor force participation and the Great Resignation. Why are these labor issues so critical to states?
It was real interesting. In Knox County, where I live and represent, we are fortunate to have the Howard Baker Center. And recently I met with the head of the Baker Center, and she actually presented to one of our Commerce Committee here in the Senate. And she is a labor expert. And so she talked about the issues of the Great Resignation and the shortage. And basically what she was saying is that it really is going to continue to be a focus, but that what has happened in many states, their economic output is back to their pre-pandemic levels in terms of goods and services. And Tennessee really is one of the states leading in the nation in economic recovery. From an output perspective, it's like the pandemic never happened. But the pandemic worsened the workforce participation rate, which was already struggling due to aging workers and a slowed rate of population growth. So in Tennessee right now, we're 95,000 workers short. What that means is the level of output was generated beyond what was produced pre-pandemic with a labor force that is substantially smaller. So what's happening is our part-time workers now have all gone full-time, and they're actually having to work extra hours, which really sometimes is driving the stress level, the burnout rate, things like that. The shift to retirement began immediately upon the outbreak of the pandemic, which accounted for about half of the country's labor workforce shortages in 2020. It's unlikely that the 2.1 million workers who left the workforce will return. She went on to tell me that future economic growth is dependent upon population growth. And it's going to be important that states are able to basically recruit people to move to their states.
This labor situation exists in all parts of the country. What are the best tools state legislators have to connect workers and employers?
One, as I said, you're going to have to recruit people to move to your state. And of course, it helps if you have a great state like Tennessee. But so a lot of that is the light regulatory status, and try to have low taxes so the cost of living and everything is reasonable for people to move to. I mean, I've got folks in my county that are going, why are all these people moving to Knox County? We like it kind of like it was, but because it increases other things. But I think beyond that, it's a multifaceted approach. You need to have workforce training for sustainable careers. You need job exploration programs at an earlier age. We're doing some of that for our middle schoolers just to kind of see, what levels they're going to go to. Dual enrollment for high school students so they can graduate with the certifications and go straight to a job. Increased funding for career and technical education. Licensure reductions and portability operations opportunities. So, as people move from state to state, they need their licenses to be portable or need it to be ease of transferring that license. And I know a lot of states nationally, I know NCSL has had a lot of help with that. Scholarships for free post-secondary and training opportunities. And we were one of the first states to have free post-secondary education in Tennessee. Blend and braid the processes that people have to go to. Too often, because the state bureaucratic levels are so extensive, you may call one department to get something done, but then you got to call somebody else to get your business license and somebody else to get your license. So we need to make sure that it's user friendly. Oh, and then increase the quality, quantity, and accessibility of childcare.
Also on this podcast is my conversation with Eric Selznow from Jobs for the Future about apprenticeships and other work-based learning programs. Do you see these as a useful tool in building a strong workforce?
I think it's very important, but as I've said, it's a multifaceted approach. But I think apprenticeships really are a shining example of things that really do help build your workforce. It helps people kind of earn to learn. Internships, apprenticeships, middle college, which is kind of where people are in their last year of high school and their first year of college at the same time, and so they will graduate from high school with also certifications. Remote programs are critical, so I think it's a combination. We've developed, and I think a number of other states have, an Office of Apprenticeship that's a part of our Department of Labor and Workforce, which helps kind of facilitate some of these opportunities.
I know, given your previous work, that you would have an interesting perspective on how to ensure that people who are living with disabilities or people living in poverty have access to these programs.
Well, it's really important. I tell you, my first experience working with kind of on the national level with NCSL, and it was actually a unique opportunity. It was NCSL and CSG combined to do the Work Matters program. I was at another just weekend training, and they go, "Oh, your day job is running an agency for people with disabilities. Can you come to a couple of meetings?" Well, that kind of sucked me in hook, line, and sinker on a lot of other things, but it was a fascinating process. We developed a lot of good policies for states that people can access. It's still very current now. When you're talking about disability, the state as a model disability employer is real important. We here in Tennessee, oftentimes our departments will ask our providers to find jobs for folks with disabilities because it is the largest unemployed group in any sector. But they don't always walk the talk. I actually finally passed that. It got kind of caught up in the pandemic year, and we got that passed last year. Another one that we did kind of as a result of that was Office of Accessible Transportation. Actually, the number one barrier to employment is not childcare, it's transportation. We were the first state to have an Office of Office of Accessible Transportation as a part of our State Department of Transportation. And what that's going to do is oftentimes there's silos of transportation opportunities for folks with disabilities or our seniors or actually our people in poverty too. they don't work together. So they may take somebody to the county line, but they can't take them the next mile over to their doctor or to their work site. Assessing where we are, assessing what the gaps are, and working together to develop kind of statewide or even regional solutions to the transportation issue. Many times people that are working non-traditional hours, and that's even harder to get the transportation in. I think those are two of the big things with disability employment. It's highlighting that folks, just because somebody has a disability doesn't mean they don't have something to offer to our community. And everybody with a disability all isn't the same. We all have different strengths and different weaknesses, and we like to refer it as differing abilities. As far as folks in poverty, I think the scholarships, the free college, and it's interesting, I was with the fella that actually created the Tennessee Promise here after he first started, and he said, a couple other states, even the president at the time had talked about, we got to do this. But he goes, they didn't want to have a mentor, which is critical for the success of it, to have a mentor. They didn't have volunteer service, which was a key component. So, the individuals that are receiving that free education need to give something back. They need to have some vested buy-in for it to really work. And I think it's important to kind of model it after. And ours is a last dollar scholarship. So they do have to apply for the federal grants and the scholarships. And then what's left, then we fund. And it's been really a very successful program.
I wonder if there's any other efforts you've made in Tennessee that you'd like to share.
Well, we're doing all kinds of things, but there's always more to do. So it's just like on the Tennessee Promise, that funds 2-year programs. We're wanting to see them fund the shorter term certification programs that might be, say, a CDL license that may take 6 months. We want to see them fund that out of the Tennessee Promise, because I think in the long run, if you find somebody that wants, that's more suited to a certification program as opposed to a 2-year program, they might do the 2-year program because they don't have the funding for it. I'm going to add one thing about the Tennessee Promise. You've got kids that are in kindergarten that maybe nobody in their family have ever gone to post-secondary. And before, they didn't have that as an option. And it wasn't something that they really felt like they could realize that dream. And now those kids, they know that if they graduate from high school in Tennessee, they can receive the Tennessee Promise to go to post-secondary. Some of them may not be able to afford 4 years of post-secondary, but if they get the first 2 years free, that helps them with the second 2 years. So a couple other things we've done the Tennessee Reconnect. What that is folks that have had some college, but because they may have started a family, they may have needed to work, they may not have been ready for post-secondary, they've left. This helps them come back and finish what they started. We've also are looking at, I'm sponsoring legislation this year that will allow basically like a gap year. So you finished high school, but you're not quite ready, and you're not quite ready. So this will allow you to pick up the Promise, say, a year later. Another new program that we've got is a registered teacher occupation apprenticeship, and we were the first state to be approved that by the U.S. Department of Labor, which established a permanent grow your own model, and this allows people to get teacher certification for free. Those are just a few. I think I mentioned some of the others as we were kind of moving through the questions, but lots of good things. But I think the key is look for those opportunities to see where you can kind of make improvements. There's not a one-size-fits-all, and you're not going to be able to solve everything at once, but just keep building on what you've got, building on the momentum to kind of help solve this issue. And it's not going to get any better by just sitting around and looking at it. It's going to take a lot of effort by a lot of not only legislators, but by governors and by administrations.
Senator, thanks for sharing your experience working on this issue. Take care. I'll be back after this break with Eric Selznow from Jobs for the Future.
NCSL's 50-state bill tracking database makes researching legislation quick and easy. From agriculture to vaping and everything in between, simply select your topic, bill status, or keyword to learn about legislation across the country. Visit our website at ncsl.org and put the words state and tracking in the search bar, or go to the research tab and select bill tracking. Let the 50-state bill tracking database work for you. Try it out today.
Eric, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Ed. It's my pleasure to be here.
Eric, thanks for taking the time to come on the show. I want to start with an overarching question about the workforce. This is a topic that was not front of mind for a lot of Americans before the pandemic, but it's been hard to avoid for the last 2 years. You've been working in the world of workforce development for more than 30 years, including with the state of Maryland at the U.S. Department of Labor and now with Jobs for the Future. What's your assessment of the state of our workforce?
Wow. Can you start with an easier question, Ed? This is a really fascinating time, and it's very different. I lived through the Great Recession back in 2009, 10, 11, and this is very different. Pandemic, politics, labor market, childcare, wages are all swirling around now, like, as you put, like we've never seen really top of mind like this in all the articles and analysis that are going on. The labor market is, despite what people say, putting inflation to the side, which seems to be the main conversation, our labor market has grown incredibly, right? Wages are up. There's 3 jobs open, 2.5 jobs open for every single job seeker out there. There are plenty of jobs for people to get, should they have, well, the key thing is should they have the experience and skills and credentials required for those. But there's an incredible amount of opportunity out there for a wide range of students and workers. So I think it's a mixed bag. If you read the newspapers, there's a really significant issue of childcare, post-pandemic childcare for folks. That's huge and front and center. And then, it's making sure that people are getting their skills in line with all these great openings that are out there. I mean, just look at the monthly reports from DOL on the labor market growth. The industries and occupation, its opportunities are growing and there's great opportunity out there. The question is, can the public workforce system, community colleges, state legislatures, state workforce agencies rise to the occasion and think innovatively and creatively about addressing some of these issues at the state level?
Well, I think you did a pretty good job of tackling that big picture question. Thank you for that. And I can't tell you how often childcare comes up in conversation, not just about workforce, but how it affects all sorts of areas. Now, more specifically, what's the state of workforce development efforts in this country, and how has that changed over your experience?
Well, I think we've gotten smarter over the years. We've gotten smarter and more targeted. We understand how employer demand really drives what we do in workforce and job training and education. At least it should drive what we do. We need to be looking at the labor market information and the opportunities within our states and local areas, and then crafting programs and solutions to fit them. I think the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, the public workforce system and one-stops and all that have their role to play. Community colleges are, a terrific partner in that system. Sometimes they're great partners. Sometimes there's challenges with those partnerships. But the partnerships, the other really important part is partnerships, and the partnerships it takes to do really high quality workforce programs is critically important, whether it's with a college or a private training provider. Your understanding of the labor market, of the skills and credentials needed by employers, we're a lot smarter at that. I think the credential world is still a little bit confusing to many folks, but if you're doing workforce right, you really need to look at it regionally. And I think that's where a lot of focus is. I worked at the federal level. Well, the country's very different. I worked at the state level. Well, the east part of the state's different than the west part of the state, and the north different than the south. You may have manufacturing in this part of the state. You may have boat building in another part. So you really have to understand your local and regional labor markets. One size doesn't fit all, and you really have to customize your approach to what the industries and the opportunities are, and then how you craft those opportunities to do them. And, certainly at the state level with a lot of your constituents, state legislators, I think, need to be, if they're not, but have gotten more into workforce or asking better questions of their state and local agencies. And so I think it's a great opportunity for for state legislators to support and provide some support for what's going on in the state. Too often, and I know I'm not answering your question directly, Ed, so forgive me, but for too long, I think many states policymakers have sort of looked at the federal funds that come into the state through WIOA and said, okay, well, it's federal funds. We don't have a dog in this fight, in this fight. But when you look across the country, you see some states that have invested general fund money and specific targeted money and have supported the federal funds, right? And I don't think anybody should just leave it to the federal funds in those programs, right? I think the states, the governor's office, the state workforce board, economic development, commerce, apprenticeship, all can be brought together in different parts of the system to help it. So I think it's good that states and legislators can sort of support, not only just with the federal funds, but some of the other activities that are going on. And not to go on too long, although I'm known to do that, Ed, look, you've got college systems, you've got K-12 systems, you've got a public workforce system. How do you sort of bring that together in a region or a local area to make workforce happen well, not only for workers, but also for the employers that you're trying to attract and keep in your state?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. One question I wanted to ask was about the roles of the federal and state governments in workforce development, and I think you did a great job of addressing that. Let me ask you now about your role as Director of Apprenticeships and Work-Based Learning at JFF. This is an area that's seen a lot of change in the last 10 to 15 years. Can you talk about how apprenticeships have evolved?
Well, so I've seen more change in the last 6 years than the last 100 years. I'm still not sure everybody out there in the workforce education and policy system quite understands it. Apprenticeship for the last 100 years in this country was centered around the building trades, some manufacturing, labor union programs and projects, and a lot in the building trades, right? And that's fine. And they're some of the best apprenticeship programs you'll find today was from our brothers and sisters in the union programs for pipe fitters and electricians and crane operators and elevator technicians and all of that. And those are really intensive. I mean, most of them are 4-year programs, right? And they're every bit as good as a college degree. But what the labor unions did from 1937, actually before that, until now, the local labor councils almost act like our intermediaries, right? So they've aggregated the demand with their employers. They know what the employers are looking for in the industry, and then they've crafted the training to address exactly what the employers are looking for in some of the traditional trades, right? And so then they've created the supply side to attract the workers, put them in a training program, and then they come out and go to their employers. It was during the Obama administration, that's when I was at the Department of Labor, that we looked across all of the federal government's investments. What is the most effective workforce program out there based on the evidence? What has the highest wages? What has the best completion rates? What has the best job retention? And if you look across all your range of workforce programs, apprenticeship is head and shoulders above all the other programs. Average wages of $70,000 plus a year, completion rates that are as high, if not higher, than many 2-year and 4 years, and a job retention rate 1 year after completion of 92%. Well, not every program does that. Very few do that. And so you look at apprenticeship and say, well, why is it just in the building trades or construction or the labor union programs? Why can't we take that model and apply it to IT and healthcare and cybersecurity or insurance and business services? Well, you can. It's just a model in which, it does not belong to the labor unions, although our present system we're building on their shoulders over the last 100 years. And the integration of on-the-job learning with the related classroom instruction, with a mentor, with built-in wage progression. As you increase your skills and competencies, your wages increase. And then it ends in a national industry recognized credential. So, anybody who's done internships or apprenticeships or on-the-job learning knows that experiential learning works, right? I learned more doing those sort of things when I was in college than I ever did in the classroom. So what apprenticeship brings is the on-the-job learning with the related theory from the classroom, with the supervision, that over however long your apprenticeship system is, at the end of that, you're a highly qualified worker in whatever that field is, whether you're a journeyman plumber or electrician, or whether you're a software developer or a nursing assistant or a phlebotomist, right? All that change in new industries and new occupations has happened since 2014. There were no investments in apprenticeship, and it was Secretary Perez in 2015 that did the first $175 million investment. And then Congress got involved in it, and Congress started out in 16 giving $90 million a year. And guess what? This year, they're going to be giving $285 million a year to apprenticeship. And there's a range of other grant programs all throughout the federal government. So we went from very little investment in a national registered apprenticeship program to almost over $1 billion now over the last 7 years. And a lot of that, if I can just finish this, goes into new industries, new occupations, but it also wants to access a broader group of participants, right? Women are historically low participants in apprenticeship. People of color have been lower, although that's getting somewhat better. But there's a lot of things to diversify apprenticeships, industries and occupations, and the people who get those opportunities.
I understand that JFF is committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion in apprenticeship programs. I think most of us can see why that's important. But can you talk about what's involved in making sure that happens and why states might want to focus on this as well?
Wow, so that's a really complicated question. We don't have enough time here, Ed, but I'll do that. Well, first, I need to put a plug in for us. We were just awarded a major grant with the Department of Labor to be one of the 4 centers of excellence in apprenticeship, a National Technical Assistance Center of Excellence. And our area is diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And what the department wants us to do with this 4-year project is to create a bunch of tools and resources for employers and workers so they're practicing the policies and practices to create a diverse apprenticeship system. Look, we have, if you're lucky, maybe 9% of apprentices are women, and that's up 2% from a couple of years ago. And while people of color are a little bit better represented according to their share of the population, we're concerned that there's occupational segregation in some of the lower rungs of apprenticeship, or even wage disparities between people of color, people with disabilities, and women in apprenticeship. So what we see it as, we see really 2 important parts of this: a purposeful and intentional focus on apprenticeship and outreach and being creative about getting into different communities, so you're creating a workforce that reflects the demographics in your community. So that's one really important part of it. The other is, it's not just about diversity, right? Diversity is easy, especially in many of our communities. It's the equity side of this. Getting diverse people into apprenticeships is one thing. Getting them to advance, getting their wages to advance, and giving them the opportunities that everybody else has is important. So we've got to create both the diversity and the equity thing. And that will be demonstrated through the evidence that DOL collects on wages and advancement and those sort of things. So it's not just good enough to create a diverse apprenticeship. It's got to have some pathway to good job, good wages. I mean, I think that all apprenticeships are good jobs and good wages, but some are better than others. And we need to diversify the people going in to increase the access and opportunity to advance.
There's a shortage of workers in certain sectors of the economy right now. And I wonder if you think apprenticeships can help with that situation.
Yeah, but I mean, you'll find nobody, Ed, who loves apprenticeship and advocates for it as much as I do, but it's not the only answer in workforce development. But it's one answer that has been ignored for too many years, and we should consider it. In the range of activities that we all do, whether you're a state workforce agency, a community college system, a workforce board, or whatever, there's more that can be done here. A shortage is a shortage is a shortage. Apprenticeship is not going to fix a shortage. What apprenticeship offers employers is a chance to build their own workforce, not buy one, right? Not just go put an ad in and say, okay, I'll pay you $15 an hour to come with me. That's buying your workforce on the market. They can build a workforce in their community. They can create pipelines and be creative about it. You want to work and create a pipeline with the local community college, which will probably have more diversity than other opportunities around there, or create a partnership with your workforce board, or work and create a youth apprenticeship pipeline through your K-12 system. A shortage is a shortage, but you can create some strategies for employers to grow their own workers, to create a pipeline for their skill needs, and to really focus on that. And while that may not address the shortage in toto, what it does is it gives companies a better strategy in which they can get the workers they need, and then more importantly, to train them in the skills that they need. Just grabbing people out of high school or college or community college is not the only way to do things in this world. You can You can work with these systems and provide opportunities for people in your communities through those systems. Employers have to be at the front of this, and employers have to be engaged. This is not a solution that community colleges or workforce boards or any of those groups can handle. We've got to get employers. We've got to have them put some skin in the game because they're the beneficiaries of this work. And we need to show them that there are some activities that can help them target, focus, and bring in the talent they need to expand and grow in their communities.
Well, there's clearly a lot more to talk about here. I'll be sure to include links to your site in our show notes. Thanks again for helping us understand this issue. Take care. And that concludes this episode of our podcast. We encourage you to review and rate NCSL podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Pocket Casts, Stitcher, or Spotify. We also encourage you to check out our other podcasts, Legislatures, The Inside Story, and the special series, Building Democracy. Thanks for listening.